Welcome.
Thank you.
This is thrilling. First of all, for me, it's thrilling to be here. We're in the offices of Private Eye, which is legendary, a legendary satirical magazine. I see the look on your face. The look on Ian Hislop's face is one that says, please, sir, do not praise me, for I shall not accept your praise, but accept it. You, my friend, it's such an honor to meet you, such a pleasure to meet you. And comedian, satirist, cultural commentator, prize fighter, which I was surprised to find out, middleweight champion of the world. Didn't realize that was in there.
Brain surgeon.
First violinist? What? Ian? Thank you for...
Yeah, that's better. I prefer the jokes.
Yes. We are in the Private Eye offices in London. And I apologize to you because my brain is not quite functioning. I flew in last night. And do you take melatonin to sleep ever?
No.
What do you take?
Usually legal action. Works a treat.
Speaking of legal action, sir, you're the key. So I know that Rupert Murdoch has tried desperately to ruin your country. And he's ruining ours at present. How do we legally stop him? And I mean legally.
Yeah, I don't think you can.
Really?
I mean, there are monopoly laws, which I don't know whether they work in the US. They didn't really work here. No. We tried a bit of that. There was cross-party support. It didn't really work under our Prime Minister, Tony Blair. In the end, he decided it was better to sup with the devil, so he went and met Murdoch, and he ended up in a compromise. I think it's up to the rest of us just to challenge it. I mean, Murdoch is trying to set up, at the moment he has a new television station in Britain, which is meant to be like Fox News.
Really?
Yeah, which is called, I think it's called Talk TV, and it stars, and again, stars is the word, Piers Morgan.
No, I'm not familiar with that name.
No, and nor with the use of the word star. So he's the lead on this, but I mean, happily for all of us here, it's a terrific flop and no one's watching.
Now, that's how they start. But as a little bit of background, so there was a scandal in 2010, 2011, where, and it's hard to even fathom sort of the depths of human depravity that they went to. But ultimately, it was the News of the World, and they hacked into the phones of people who had died.
Yeah.
And the revelation that came out of it was obviously the closeness of Rupert Murdoch to conservative MPs and to the Tories. The same thing is happening again with, are you familiar with this Dominion lawsuit? Yeah,
I mean, from our point of view, this is a continuation of the Trump assault on reality, which is essentially things that are quite obviously true, you say aren't true, and things that are quite obviously not true, you say are true. I mean, it is an attempt to stop people having any connection to the real world.
Right.
And when we watch from here, Fox News or, mainstream news with those people on it, it's difficult to believe. And often in Britain, we feel we're about 5 years behind the States. So you got Trump, then we got Boris Johnson.
Yes.
It's a diminished version, but it's the same playbook. Wow. And we get worried that we will end up in a world where it doesn't matter if you're found out, literally where you can come on. And Boris Johnson has he has been found out. He was removed from office, which is very good news.
But they got Capone on taxes. I mean, he was removed from office from having parties, for having...
He wasn't actually. Again, this is part of the narrative that everyone must remember. He was removed from office because all his government resigned after he appointed a man who was a known groper of young male assistants, and he appointed him to a post in government. Right. And then he sent out his ministers to say, no, I had no idea about him. But actually, he did. Because his name was Pincher, and he called him Pincher by name, Pincher by nature. You see, that's knowledge. He did know about him, and he appointed him. So everybody in his cabinet, more or less from the top downwards, apart from the lunatics, sent letters saying, I can't work with you. You don't tell the truth. You have no moral compass. You have no ethics.
Yeah, that's never been. But can I tell you what a pleasure it is that British corruption is so still clever. I mean, Pincher by name, Pincher by nature.
At least it's a joke.
At least it's, you have to respect the witticisms of the corruption.
Yeah, I mean, the trouble is about Boris Johnson, we lost our sense of humour a while back.
It's no longer the wild hair and the zip lining and getting stuck in the middle. That doesn't thrill in the way that it used to.
No, it's him coming up and saying, look, I told you you couldn't visit your grandmother in the care home when she's dying. But me, I was pissed as a party. It's great. You do what I say, but me,
I don't have to do it.
Doesn't apply to me.
That's right. We've got the same thing working in the States with, when they were doing the lockdowns. The sort of famous one is Gavin Newsom going to French Laundry, which is this beautiful restaurant in the middle of everything.
Yeah. And it gets people really angry. And people are still angry here.
Right.
We've got a scandal blowing up at the moment. The then health secretary he literally was caught on a CCTV camera in his office snogging his assistant. He was married, obviously. Conservative, tradition in this country.
No, it is.
So he was snogging his assistant and, in fact, groping her bum. He was caught on CCTV. This is when we were meant to be observing social distancing. 6 foot. He wasn't 6 foot away. He had his tongue down her throat. And he'd appointed this woman. I hate to interrupt you, but I just, I'm on a roll. He appointed this woman because he'd fancied her when they were at college. And she'd always thought he was a bit of a geek. But when he became in the government, he appointed her to his own team and then got off with her. And the rest of us are thinking, we're wondering whether we can go outside and have a cup of tea or whether we have to say we're exercising or whether the police will move us on. And you're just groping people in your office?
Yes. Now,
it does get you quite annoyed.
But to be fair, Ian,
I don't want to be fair for a minute.
In the early days of COVID, that was how they tested. Before they could swab, you had to use your tongue.
Yeah, it was an oral test.
And that's exactly right. And so they would just look, if you could collect from the back of the tonsil through the tongue, it was, I'm sure he was, it's all on the up and up.
Everyone was learning as they went along.
I want to ask you about this because as somebody who's fought this for your adult life, this idea of public piety and private perversity and corruption and all these different elements, I think the most difficult thing for me to understand, as someone who got into the business of comedy, the idea was always the fable of the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah.
And you always thought, you know what, to be that child who sees things that are obvious, that the grown-ups are pretending isn't there, and to call it out.
Yeah.
And you always imagine in the calling out that the crowd says, my God, the veil has been lifted.
Yeah.
And what you never thought is that you would call it out and then just everyone would, then everyone would just continue the farce naked. The emperor has no clothes. And they'd go like, yeah, but
yeah, or
it's okay.
Worse, half the crowd saying, no, he's got clothes on.
He's got clothes on.
I can see the clothes.
Or he's got clothes on and you're a pedophile.
Yeah.
It's
a conspiracy. I mean, if you knew what I knew, if you'd sat in your bedroom and read this blog, which isn't true, you would know what I know as a person who sits in his bedroom and reads drivel on the internet. You would know that he has actually got clothes on. But he hasn't. He really hasn't got clothes on.
That's right.
So that's the worst bit of getting to this stage is small boy, you, me, childish, sense of humour, thinking, he's got no clothes on, I'll point him out. The emperor in the fable realises that he's made a fool of himself and he doesn't have any clothes on. Nowadays, the emperor is Trump, the emperor is Boris. He says, no, I haven't got clothes on. And these machines that you're seeing through have made the clothes invalid. I mean, it is mad.
It's madness.
It is mad. And the only thing that seems to work, and it worked here, was repetition.
Being as tenacious as that side.
If you say it often enough,
at
a certain point for us, Boris Johnson, he'd always been a liar, but he became a liability. And at that point, his own party thought, no, we've had enough of you now. I think there was a moment when there was elements in the Republican Party that began to think we might do better with someone else. Now, I don't know if someone else is going to be worse.
Right.
But you can tell me that. But at least there is...
I've got some bad news.
Okay.
How many years behind us are you?
About 5.
Okay.
Well,
Clock's
about 200,
ticking.
really.
So you get about 3.5 more years left. And then it all is going to fall through. I want to, Trump is such an outsized figure.
Yeah.
But the groundwork for Trump has really been laid in our country for the past 40 or 50 years.
Yeah.
And it is that the right wing very explicitly decided, and this is in the 70s and 80s after Nixon was taken down, and Roger Ailes, who ran Fox News for a long time, was Nixon's advisor. They explicitly stated, we need to control the narrative so that what happened to Nixon could never happen again to another Republican. And they built parallel structures of authority in news, in institutions like universities, in think tanks, almost to shift to this other track, this kind of Potemkin village, the facade that they could build on the side. But you don't have that here.
No. There are attempts to set it up, but we don't have it yet. We do have a very right-wing press at the moment. Right. I mean, more so. They have shifted to the right. And they've become less representative, I think, of the electorate, but more representative of this rump of a Conservative Party which we have left.
Right.
But we do have the BBC, which obviously our government hates. I mean, all governments hate the BBC. The BBC is a sort of national broadcaster. It's independent, but funded by the licence fee. So all governments say the BBC is biased against us, which they aren't, but they are critical of them.
Right.
And criticism, as you know, governments don't want that.
No, it's a terrible thing.
But this lot, and again, following the Trumpian model, they have done it fairly explicitly, have said we must get rid of the BBC because it's not allowing you real news.
Right.
And by real, they mean fake, obviously.
Right.
They're not allowing us to peddle a narrative which isn't true. And it was certainly true during lockdown. And there are a number of, the anti-vaxxers were out. There's a sort of group of lunatic conspiracy theories which used to be on the fringe of the party.
That's right.
And they're now in the middle of the party. The Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph, in particular, have taken up a very extreme position, which is new for us.
Right.
So the controlling of the sensible narrative is getting more difficult, and they're just indications that with the GB News, which is another attempt to be Fox News, and they've employed most of the people who were thrown out of the last government. So you've got Jacob Rees-Mogg on there and Nadine Dorris. These names may not mean anything.
You're beginning now that cycle of government to media and that revolving door where they go into government to ruin everybody's lives and then get a pretty nice payday at a media institute or a media network.
And then they go live on television and say, I was right all along.
Right.
And you're thinking, no, I do remember the bit where you weren't right at all.
Right. And we've got it on tape, and we're going to show it to you,
Yeah.
and that's still not going to do it.
No.
The difficulty sometimes is that the legacy media, or the mainstream media, as they would call it, don't do themselves any favors by also falling prey to sensationalism or groupthink or reacting. What happened in the United States was the media finally met in an entity as narcissistic as they are, and that's Trump. And so they found in him this natural enemy, and they took the bait. And so their behavior during the Trump years really was one of, okay, we are your enemy, and we are your foe, and we're going to behave in that manner. And they lost some perspective, which gives fuel to those
who say you haven't got it. Yeah.
Because all you need is a little bit of a window opening.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that is the time to be cautious. And I think Trump's gift was he managed to suggest that criticising him was criticising the general public, was criticising ordinary Americans.
Yes.
And in this country, it's for people like myself to say, well, you would think that because you're very badly educated and you haven't thought about it as much as I have. I mean, that won't do. We know that. You don't, you don't defeat populist arguments by telling people they're stupid. And we had this particularly over Brexit, which is Britain leaving the EU, which I thought at the time and still think, and now opinion polls have come round to our point of view, that was a terrible, terrible error. It was an outbreak of sort of Trumpian nationalism, of Little Englander, isolationism of the type that, you know, is pretty current throughout the world at the moment. And we thought we were above that, and we found we weren't. It came and, you know, it hit Britain in just the same way as it hit elsewhere. And this was sort of people thinking, you don't care about us, you don't care about the working class, you're extremely elite, and the mainstream media is in league with you. Now, I've made a number of documentaries about fake news, and what interests me is the first person to use the phrase mainstream media was Joseph Goebbels.
That's not so.
It is so.
No.
And he, in one of his propaganda sheets, said, it's very important that you don't read the mainstream media because they'll tell you lies. You must read the truth, i.e. the ramblings of his boss and his associated work. And you do have to watch this. This is a very, very well-established technique of fascists, is to tell you, don't read this stuff, read our stuff.
It's such a complicated mix because this move to populism, which is so now taken hold in, and you see it now in
France
and Italy and all these other places. In some ways, it's hard not to connect it to the actions of the United States and the destabilizing, first of all, of globalization and corporations sort of manufacturing bases moving out of, you know, Britain and the United States and moving to places where they could pay people nothing. And it's sort of a colonialism light, where we try and establish supply lines without having to use the army.
Yeah.
And the destabilization of the Middle East and sort of driving that refugee migration and all that. And have we, in our desire to spread democracy and light, I don't know if you know this, but the United States is a shining city on a hill.
Yeah, no, I did read that somewhere. Yeah, I mean, you know, and we remain desirous to believe that, but we're aware of its foreign policy faults as well as our own. But there is, I think, you know, the United States may well want to beat itself up, but Europe can equally do the same. There was a failure in 10, 20 years of globalization and internationalism of failing to consider the worst off sections of your own population.
Right.
So everything looked great. This is good. We all believe in the ideas. Ever greater union. All our problems need to be solved collectively. No one's going to solve, you know, global warming through nationalism. It isn't going to happen. Right. You know, smaller the nation.
But it's in the pursuit of cheap T-shirts and
and all of this, but also in pursuit of a sort of an attempt to get some sort of control over the little bits of your life left. So in Britain, the entire Brexit movement was, let's get back control.
Mm-hmm. A nostalgia.
Whatever that means.
Right.
I mean, it was a desire to control.
Make Britain great again.
Yeah. I mean, again, we didn't go that far because we can't really face that sort of overstatement. We leave that to America.
Right.
But
the humble nature of your country is what saves it.
It's humble in its desire to be, you know, the most modest nation on earth. We're very proud of our humbleness.
Yes.
But yes, I accept there is a responsibility for this outbreak of populism. But when it arrives, to merely go with it and not to resist it seems to me a double failing.
That's
right. For the elite to say, it's us, it's terrible.
Right.
We should have done this earlier. Well, you've got to do it now.
Are you seeing it now as the results of it are not the blossoming of what they remembered to be the time of greatness?
Yeah,
is that what has taken some of the steam out of it?
What's taken the steam out of Brexit is it was a terrible idea and it's
executed badly.
No, and it's not an idea you can execute well. It's very simple.
Right.
And
Well, Rishi Sunak, hasn't he now fixed it? I was under the impression that the new prime minister, and by the way, the idea to just rotate them every 3 months, I think is something that will catch on everywhere else.
Yeah, as long as during the 3 months where they're in charge, they don't lose you £30 billion. No, we've tried out the total free market lunatic.
Yes.
That didn't go so well.
I thought that was my favorite thing ever, was when Liz Truss came in and said, I believe inflation is terrible, so we're going to go with austerity and we're going to cut taxes for the rich. I thought, well, it's like taking Ambien and cocaine and thinking, it's all going to even out, right? This will be fine.
I mean, and it was a case of literally, I mean, this is why it was a very good moment for us, and you haven't had the state, so I think we might be ahead of you here.
Yes.
We had someone who literally did student politics and got into power, sacked everyone. She sacked the civil servants at the Treasury, who normally are the adults who say, you really can't do this. This will be terrible.
The guardrails were gone.
Yeah, everything gone, and she did it. And then she said, I was defeated by the left-wing economic establishment. Now, I don't know if you've met any left-wing hedge funders or deeply socialist equity traders. Mm-hmm. We don't have any in this country.
Yes.
The financial markets, the people she loved, the people that the Conservative Party worship, said, you're mad, we're going to bankrupt the country. And literally the Treasurer ended up saying, we can't borrow any money because no one will lend it to us. I don't know if anyone's ever said this to you, that governments have to borrow money from other people.
But isn't that what Russian oligarchs are for?
Yeah. No,
when your country won't have money to lend, won't they come in and say, how about we do this? We'll just buy up Portobello Road.
Yeah.
And that should give you enough to get you through the next 3 months.
No, even the oligarchs weren't
they
going
didn't
for
even
it.
want to invest in it.
No, you do have a problem with, government in that if people think you're run by lunatics, they won't lend you any money. And that becomes a problem.
Anyway. Then who knows what happens to interest rates?
Yeah. Well, anyway, I mean, she was removed within,
Yeah.
We have a newspaper here called the Daily Star, which had they bought a lettuce and they said, will the lettuce last longer than Liz Truss? Which was a very, very good joke. And the lettuce was fine. She was
It ended up being okay.
Yeah, the lettuce is Prime Minister now. That's coming up. Anyway, so we got an adult who immediately, reversed everything that she'd done.
Right.
And then the market stabilised, and then we started back where we were, but minus 30 billion quid, which is quite a lot of money.
Well, they've even said, I think we were looking at the IMF said that the economy in Britain will contract or perform worse than Russia even this year.
Yeah.
And so have you thought about invading anybody? Have you thought about, is there anything, anybody who you've got your eye on?
Cornwall. No, we're short of options. We really are.
That's the end of it. I wonder if, you've spent your whole life, looking at the difference between what these public figures say and what's going on in the back room.
Yeah.
And now we're starting to see, from this Dominion lawsuit in the United States, the emails from the back room. And it is explicitly exactly what you thought it was, in the way that you probably found during the news of the world.
Yeah. And also, recently we are having a cache of WhatsApp group messages exchanged during government has been made public.
Oh,
There's
really?
been a leak of the health secretary and the then Prime Minister during lockdown. And Private Eye...
About what they were doing.
Yeah, literally their WhatsApp group. Right. During why they were taking certain measures, what they were saying about each other. There's literally a WhatsApp group where various aides are saying to each other, this story about the Prime Minister that he's putting out, it's got some holes in it. Literally, they're saying it's got some holes in it. And you're thinking, that means he's lying, which is what we said all along.
Right.
But Private Eye, every week, we run a fake WhatsApp group of the Prime Minister. And I've been looking at it recently thinking, we didn't go far enough.
Right.
We just literally didn't push the jokes because they're worse than you think. Boris Johnson, well, enough, his chief scientific advisor is trying to explain to him the difference between a percentage and a probability.
Oh, dear Lord.
This is during a COVID outbreak. And Boris, he doesn't get it. I mean, you know, he read classics. You know, clearly.
He wanted to talk Homer. He didn't really want to talk about the chances.
But basic maths is good, I think, with your leader.
It can be useful.
It can be
at
useful.
certain times. But it is when you are confronted with the idea that it is as explicitly corrupt as what you thought it was. Do we have? Is there any accountability? I think what's so lacking certainly in American life is the sense that when there is that corruption that's so explicit, that there is some measure of accountability that can be taken. Yeah. Which has been so difficult to get a handle on. Yeah.
Well, I think it's still better here. I mean, we had a public inquiry, we've got another one coming up.
Right.
The Prime Minister was censored. He was removed. We've got another standards committee coming up. There's still some mechanisms.
Right.
I mean, the appalling corruption over the contracts of PPE equipment, which I don't know if that was equally big in America, but who got the contracts and how useless this stuff was is amazing.
We're really good at glossing over corruption stories and moving on. It's right. the dog from Up. It's always squirrel. And somebody moves to the next distraction.
But America always seems to us to have so many lawyers. You just think, what are they doing?
We are
surely they should all be suing each other furiously.
We are a lawyer-based economy.
And with the Dominion scandal, I mean, is that a defamation? I mean, to say, so that's why this stuff's coming out.
That's right. It's the only reason why it's coming out.
Yeah.
And it's the only reason why, and they were so comfortable with the idea that none of their private communications would ever come out, which is why it's so explicit, to the point of saying these people are crazy with their election, the stolen election narrative and the ways that they think it's stolen. They're crazy, but if we say that, we'll lose our audience. It's a fascinating look at just sort of like, do you know the Ouroboros, the sort of the snake? We call it the snake sucking its own dick. Like, America has become a snake sucking its own dick. And they create this rabid through AM talk radio, which is just populism and nativism drilled at the earliest age, a news network that's reinforcing that's selecting stories that only reinforce their fear of the other or black or trans or anything that might be considered different.
Yeah.
They revved them up to that point. And then it becomes impermeable.
Yeah.
And if you present anything, and they were aware of that.
Yeah.
And they felt that they couldn't, the Frankenstein that they had created, they could no longer say, like, fire's actually not that bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
You'll be okay.
But is there not a point where, and this is what we despair when it doesn't happen here, is when does shame kick in? If you're a national broadcasting figure and you've lied to your audience, you've told them things are true that are not true deliberately, and this is exposed, at what point do you go home and think, I should resign, I should go?
Shame is, the shamelessness is, and this is something that I'm curious what you think about. It's why I think so many on the right are aligning themselves with Russia over Ukraine. Because nobody can look at those two countries and say they're, one is, a shining beacon of democracy fighting against autocracy.
Yeah.
But I think that Putin represents to them in some ways this Western civilization that they would like to also protect. It's not very democratic, it's anti-gay, it's mostly singular in terms of its ethnicity. And so they see that actually as political alignment. That the right in America, and maybe even the right in Britain, don't actually view Putin as a foe, but as an ally ideologically.
Yeah, but this is real echo chamber nonsense, isn't it, really? I mean, any basic look at Russian history would suggest that this isn't true.
But what I'm saying is, shame won't kick in because they've got a larger ideal that they're pursuing.
I think
That they will do anything by any means necessary to get back to that sort of more authoritarian ideal of what the country was.
Yeah, but it wasn't. And the authoritarian, it was in Russia because, it's got a fairly straightforward history of authoritarianism. Right. But it isn't, for them, a natural ally. It is, as we know, after the wall came down, it is a country which has reverted to a Tsarist model. Right. It's dropped the ideology from the communist days and kept the repression. So Putin is essentially Stalin, who, he admires and reveres, but without any of the belief. And whether you think Stalin believed even 1% of it, or was just a Georgian thug who took over, you can read the history books. But essentially, Putin doesn't believe any of this stuff, and he does it anyway. And, the latest thing is Putin has just been rumbled putting vast amounts of property into companies that represent the woman, the gymnast who he has had the children with. So there is nothing admirable, there is nothing ideological, there is no crusade. I mean, I imagine that, the religious right in America perhaps they should have a look at the Russian Orthodox Church and see whether they're natural allies. Are they? None of this makes sense.
None of it makes sense. But if you look at the alliances, so we have this group in America called CPAC, and it's these conferences of conservatives, and it's very political, and Trump just spoke at it and all that. They held their last conference in Hungary. And Orban is held up as a figure of this is where democracies should be going. And he's just one degree of difficulty removed from a Putin-type figure. But they're all aligning in a way that says, and we don't have shame because we don't care how we get it done, we're going to get it done.
Yeah, I think that's very generous.
And Farage and all those guys. Yeah. They're all aligned.
Yeah, but all of them, I think, are cynical and without any ideology and without any morals. Yes. And the morality is a fig leaf. I'm still the little boy saying, the reason you are saying this phrase, in order to defend democracy, we must ally ourselves with a lot of people who are tyrants. Now, that seems to be, what we used to call nonsense.
But have they flipped that here? Because what they're doing now in America is the real tyranny is woke. Right. Woke is the tyranny. In fact, if you listen to Putin's speeches, he started to take that phraseology. Yeah. What they're suggesting is, no. Diversity is tyranny. Democracy, they've taken to saying in America, we're not a democracy. We're actually a constitutional republic. And you want to say, which I don't know if you read it, lays out a representative democracy, but that's for another day.
I'm sure you've been through it.
Oh, Jesus. Has that sort of explicit kind of repudiation of democracy or to use diversity as the real tyranny, has that taken on here?
No, because we're not in a position where we're saying we don't believe in democracy yet.
Right.
And also we had a good public...
5 years.
Oh, give it. But we did have a good public shaming over our sort of middle class and our professional classes taking vast amounts of Russian money, lawyers, bankers, whatever. And Britain became, for about 10 years, there's a very, very good book called The Butler of the World. We essentially went round the rest of the world fawning, saying, any services we can offer you, sir? We do very good libel actions. We do marvellous...
We're starting golf tournaments with the Saudis. I don't know what we're doing.
I mean, and it's been a terrible time. And the Chinese, again, Britain has entirely woken up to the fact that your fridge is now reporting back. If you happen to mention you're not pretty
Every
cheap.
TikTok dance we do gives another piece of information.
But, Britain had literally said, we must get the Chinese to build our nuclear reactors. That's a good idea. That's a really good idea. Put them in charge of the nuclear material at the heart of the reaction. I mean, we took some unbelievably naive decisions as a country because we were sucking up to anybody who had any money. And that was the Russians, that was the Chinese. Come in, London in particular, come in. We're an enormous washing machine. Shove your money in,
And the EU,
we'll throw it out.
which was your, the single market and all that, was the thing that everybody resented. But nobody resented the money from autocracies.
No, and they said that the EU was a tyranny because it involved
That's the flip that's been happening. Where
pooling sovereignty. It involved small amounts of cooperation. And anybody who looks at the world and doesn't spend their time fighting culture wars on the, in their bedroom on their laptop would think these are quite big problems, and most of them have to be solved by compromise, negotiation, coordinated effort. I mean, none of this is rocket science. They're not going to be solved by saying the big problem about climate change is it's woke.
But that is
it?
It is.
Is that
exact,
it? Is that the argument?
It is. Sadly, it is. Right now, you would think that pronouns have taken over and are bombing Ukraine.
Yeah. Any of this stuff, any of this culture war stuff, I would say, is an attempted diversion.
It's cynicism.
Yeah. I mean, it's worse than that. I mean, there's so many problems.
Right.
That the idea that the Conservative Party is saying, we will win the election, it's like saying we will devote ourselves as politicians to things that aren't politics. We're going to join in some other...
Do you think ultimately they actually care, or they just view it as a path to power?
No, I don't think they care at all.
Right. That's
I
the sense I get.
I mean, you look at someone like Russia, which has a sort of residual empire by Tsarist days, full of non-diverse people.
Correct.
And say in a place like Chechnya, it didn't go so well for them, being non-diverse. So the idea that Russia is somehow this sort of...
defender of Western civilization and values.
It isn't. And Putin was pre-Trump. Putin literally appointed a man who was a sort of theatrical impresario to say to him, how do I present what isn't true as true?
Right.
And
it's explicit.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting to me is the explicit nature of that kind of propaganda in an authoritarian regime is revealed in the emails of the Dominion lawsuit. Because what you see, Rupert Murdoch says in the emails to the head of Fox News, we must do whatever we can to help right-wing Republican control of the Senate. Now, this is explicit.
Yeah.
And so what you realize is this has nothing to do with a point of view. It has nothing to do with perhaps a slightly different worldview, and everything to do with an organization that has been built explicitly as a propaganda arm for a political movement.
Yeah. And you think if you want to be in politics, go into politics. Doing it behind the scenes is just corrupt.
That's exactly right.
If you want to test yourself, stand. Say you're a party. The idea that you, behind the scenes, influence what is happening without at any point being tested, just through the power of money. In terms
and does
of your
shame
media.
ever, is that a family that can be shamed? Is he a man now? And I'm under no illusion that if it wasn't Murdoch, it would be somebody else, because, power will find a way to exercise itself.
He's been very canny about it in a lot of continents, including ours, over the years. So it's not entirely accidental. Right. It is Murdoch. I mean, he is an evil genius in terms of...
What about the dynasty of that family? Will his heirs carry on the work of there, or will there be in any way when he passes, and I think definitely within the next 50 years that will happen.
You're such an optimist.
50 to 60. I'm giving it a window. I think I have him marrying another model around 2045.
He's got a lot of wives left.
He's got a lot of wives left in him.
He's barely started. And Succession needs another couple of series.
But do you think there'll ever be a reckoning where they say, I actually think, we're destroying the very thing we
like?
Right.
I hope it won't come. Part of me would love to be there saying, I told you so. But another part of me, which is mildly human, as opposed to just
pure satire. You just love the comedy of it. That's what you're going for.
I mean, with the Murdoch Empire, what is funny about it is the boys are obviously useless. and he won't give it to the girl because he's Murdoch.
It's a girl. How is
yeah.
she going to handle it?
No, so that's no good.
I think Rebecca Brooks will ultimately be granted. She will be Charlie in the Chocolate Factory. She will find the golden ticket and will be given the elevator that flies everywhere.
Yes, and again, I mean, Rebecca Brooks, there's a picture of her on the wall.
I love it.
It's a Halloween special. It says, which costume withdrawn from shops? I mean, that's not funny.
It's not funny at all.
No.
How dare you, sir? At long last, have you no decency?
No, it was the first day of her trial. Obviously, there was a suggestion that this cover was taken into the court, and their barrister said, this is contempt of court. Private Eye is trying to influence this action.
You know, Private Eye is...
And I was appalled.
You are the real tyranny, sir. How dare you?
Yeah, but fortunately, a very, very wise judge who got very cross and said, but no.
Now,
it isn't contempt.
The libel laws here are much more difficult than they are in the United States, and people sue you constantly.
Well, we don't have what you have. You have to prove malice.
Yeah.
Here it's taken as read, obviously.
Here they just have to prove you were being mean, sir.
Yeah. And again, I mean, we've finally woken up. I mean, the oligarchs spent a good 10 years. I mean, can you believe that the head of Wagner Group, the group of mercenaries who recruit convicts and go in, he was suing journalists for suggesting that, I don't know, mercenaries operating in the middle of the war aren't very nice. Wow. Anyway, we've had a lot of trouble with those sorts of defamations. But again, I think, you know, I am more of an optimist, and I feel we're waking up a bit here, in the proper sense of wake, as to what this looks like.
Right, and starting to maybe turn a corner.
Yeah, I mean, certainly trying to feel that there isn't only one narrative. We don't have to go the same way.
Right.
I mean, there was a headline, our ex-Prime Minister Boris Johnson there's an interim report about his behaviour during COVID and the parties, and the interim report makes it absolutely clear he knew what was going on and he's guilty. He went on television and said, I've been vindicated. No,
Classic. Classic move.
But one of the newspapers just said, he's gone full Trump. And I thought, that's right. And if he's gone full Trump, then that may be the end of him. So I was feeling it was possible. It was possible that we don't have to entirely follow your model.
You're welcome. I think it's absolutely your optimism is well taken. I love the work that you do and you've been doing for so long. And you're right. You can never stop trying to expose that the emperor has no clothes because when you do, then it's just we've given up. Then we've just tilted over the king and said, it's over. You know, I'm always reminded of, in the United States, in the 1920s, I don't know if you know this, but we've had some racial issues
missed that.
Yeah, it started, I don't want to get into it, but the Ku Klux Klan, in the 1920s got really powerful and big. And what took them down, or what at least shrunk them, was not necessarily a reckoning with racist ideology or the past of a country. It was an expose on the peculiarities of their initiations and how silly they were.
Yeah.
And the exposure of that took away all of their mystique, and ultimately is what led to them. And it's what I love so much about the work that you do.
Well, I think this is true of everyone, and the best satirists, even in the worst countries, you know, the Russian ones, what they try and make Putin not merely scary but ridiculous.
Yes.
Because that is the thing that, on the whole, tyrants and dictators can't bear. I mean, it came into this office, there was, during the Balkans War, there was two very, very brilliant young Croatians, and they set up a satirical magazine during the war.
Oh, my God.
And they came in, and I said to them, I said, look, I think you guys are really, really brave. And they looked at me and they said, I don't care if you think I'm brave. Am I funny? And I said, yeah, you're funny. And that's how to do it, I think.
Well, then I can give you both compliments. I can say both. Ian Hislop, thank you so much for joining us and sitting down.
No, thank you. Real pleasure.
Oh, thank you.